All right, hello everyone, and welcome to my channel. This is an educational channel where we do videos on great theories of everything, ancient and modern, things that you can study up on, and they will help you with your paradigm shifting, your awakening to 5D consciousness, your formation of a holistic worldview, your quest for better spiritual, mental, and physical health. And we usually focus on things that are pretty obscure that you probably haven't heard of before. Most of you have probably heard of Buddhism, but this is a take from an author named Daniel Ingram, his book called Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. And I wouldn't call this book on Buddhism per se, but it's more really a critique of Buddhism and really an expose, but really a look into the core teachings, in particular insight meditation and concentration meditation, and especially insight meditation, which is meditation on the 6 sense doors, 5 senses, and the mental sensations, and investigating those for the 3 characteristics of impermanence, dissatisfactoriness, and no self. So you basically investigate and learn more and more that all of your sensations are not you. They're not satisfactory. They don't have the ability to satisfy you. And they are impermanent. They are arising and passing away utterly. And today is our 69th video that we've done on this. So we are far into this book. And I think we're in about chapter 38. And this chapter is on the Enlightenment models. Ingram, one thing that is great about this book, well, you know, he has learned all this stuff the hard way through, you know, going over to the Far East, spending months and months in Buddhist monasteries, meditating 18 to 20 hours a day for months at a time, and picking the brains of the lamas and dorshis and sayadaws and whoever else over there, and bringing it back to us, putting it in English on a silver platter for us to not go down all the dead-end streets that he went down. So, you know, it's not a religion that he's talking about. He's talking about a practice, a process, a technique, a science, because it is reproducible. He believes that humans are hardwired to have these same experiences, whether they are pagans or Christians or Jews or Muslims or atheists. If you sit down to meditation and you follow these techniques, you will have the same experiences. You may have different symbolic, archetypes appear to you, and so on, depending on your belief system. But anyway, we are in the chapter where he's looking. What I like about the book is that Ingram he discusses all these different maps, the maps of the stages of consciousness that you go through when you're doing either one of these kinds of meditation, and concentration or insight. Concentration on a specific object or insight into the 3 characteristics of the sensations. And the other training of Buddhism is morality. So he also, gives focus to morality, training in morality, just, ethics. And but he maps out things, and this chapter is really on the critique on all the various uh, kind of telltale signs that different traditions have for awakening or enlightenment. Like, you know, they'll say, oh, if a person is enlightened, that means that their emotions have been extinguished and they won't show any emotions, or they won't show any negative emotions. Or if a person is enlightened, that they will, you know, exude a flowery smell or whatever. And so he's looking at all these different telltale signs, and we're in a section that is on the energy models. Like, so if a person is enlightened, that means that all their chakras will be aligned and rotating in the right direction. He just kind of talked about that example. So we're moving on here in the middle of that section. Kundalini phenomena, where potent energy, wind, prana, lung, chi, etc., courses through the central channel, Sushumna, are very common in the arising and passing stage, stage number 4 of the insight stages. Some traditions associate this with awakening. I consider this erroneous and premature, though I can't understand why these stages impress people so much. It is during the arising and passing away stage that some practitioners with a bent or talent for doing so may perceive energy channels, sometimes in outrageous detail, and be able to see chakras and the like. These are very cool and interesting experiences, and manipulating those channels can cause all sorts of positive or negative and interesting effects. Toying with Kundalini effects can also cause psychosis, severe emotional imbalance, and bizarre physiological conditions, not all of which may be entirely reversed. Anyone who can perceive energy channels either visually and or physically in a sustained fashion will note that in the dark night the channels are a mess in most people, and in high equanimity the focus shifts to experience itself. High equanimity, stage 11. Not nearly so much to what is in that field of experience, and thus the channels can be difficult to perceive or can be a secondary background aspect to what is going on. Further awakened beings cycle all the time. Their moods and health and other factors change all the time. And so what their channels are doing and how they perceive them will change all the time, leading to nothing resembling the stable, clean, orderly, perfected, predictable, energetic state promised by the energetic models. I have seen energy channels and centers, and they shift around, change, morph, at times appear very complex, and at others very simple. Colors vary, as do many other aspects. Thus, energetic models are another example of a transient side effect of some people's practice being incorporated into an ideal of awakening. While energetic practices are very interesting and may lead to some insights and other physical effects, this is not the same thing as awakened beings having stable, perfected energetic systems. Kenneth Folk has asked me to add that there is something good that progressively awakening does to the channels and energetic system, and I agree. However, defining exactly what positive changes are made is difficult, and none of the models I have seen really do an adequate job or contain enough flexibility to accommodate how dynamic our energetic systems are. This is one more set of models that is on to something, but contains much that requires revision. Okay, this section is called the sleep models. The sleep models generally relate to either sleeping less or being awake in some way while asleep. Sleeping less is common during retreats, particularly in some stages such as the arising and passing away. I also know some people who, because of spiritual attainments, have reduced their need for sleep, and this has happened to me at points, but it hasn't been sustained in my case. More interesting than those effects are the possibilities of being awake in various ways during sleep. Lucid dreams and out-of-body travel are two commonly described effects, though many people who aren't technically awake also have these experiences. However, some dreams can show aspects of how awakening persists in the dream stage. I remember a dream in which I was giving a Dharma talk. During the talk, I was putting about half of my attention on noticing the awake, centerless, luminous field of experience, just like what happens when I notice it when awake. Taking the awake during sleep theme further, we have those who have developed the ability to stay conscious in the same way throughout the middle of the night and not drop into unconsciousness or deep sleep at all. I personally haven't managed this, though I haven't emphasized those practices in my own training so far. Some models of awakening use some of these unusual sleep effects as part of their endpoint criteria. You can find further information about models like this in books such as B. Alan Wallace's Dreaming Yourself Awake, Lucid Dreaming and Tibetan Dream Yoga for Insight and Transformation, as well as Tenzin Wangyal Rinpoche's The Tibetan Yogas of Dream and Sleep. I really like this book and his other works also, such as Wonders of the Natural Mind, and I recommend you check out his take on practice. Also recommended is Sleeping, Dreaming, and Dying, an exploration of consciousness with the Dalai Lama, edited and narrated by Francisco Varela. I personally haven't yet done as much of those formal sleep-related practices as I have done the other practices that I discuss in this book. So if you want more information about them, you should get it from those who have experience with them. This section is called the Specific Knowledge Models. On a totally different tangent, the specific knowledge models basically state or imply that awakening will somehow magically provide hidden conceptual information about all sorts of specific things in life, such as the workings of particle physics, how to bring about world peace, who our disciples should marry, and the like. Some go further and state that enlightenment progressively brings complete omniscience, meaning the ability to know everything simultaneously about every single part and particle of the entire, at least 800 trillion mile wide universe. While these might seem to some people like reasonable things awakened beings should somehow know, let's include other things it might be good to know, such as how to create safe, inexpensive lithium-ion batteries for electric cars, how to consistently beat the return of an S&P 500 index fund over the long haul, how to balance the federal deficit while providing everyone with outstanding social services and not raising taxes, how to instantaneously make every blue-collar Republican realize that they are voting against their own self-interest. Well, won't comment on that. If they're self-interest, whatever. And how to build a fusion reactor that is safe, inexpensive, produces enough energy for everyone on the planet, and has no radioactive disposal issues. If you believe in nuclear energy, I suggest you read some Dewey Larson and understand the reciprocal system of theory. His first book is called The Case Against the Nuclear Atom. And you can call it atomic energy. When you consider these, the concept of specific knowledge gained by merely seeing the true nature of ordinary sensations begins to seem as ridiculous as it really is. I would just also say that I've done like 580 some videos on the reciprocal system of theory. If you're interested in checking that out, start from the beginning and browse around. The only specific thing I did gain a little insight into was the beauty of differential equations that discuss the oscillation from the imaginary quantities, potential, to real quantities, manifestation. But that's about it. Other than a bunch of direct knowledge about how the mind works and a whole lot of knowledge about what a load of crap most religious and mystical dogma is, and that includes much Buddhist dogma. I didn't really get any specific knowledge of anything else. So much for that idea. This is called the psychological models. There's another thing that didn't happen upon awakening: psychological perfection. While the mainstream Western Buddhist world is absolutely drowning in the notion that somehow Buddhist practice will either eliminate all their psychological stuff or at least cause them to become self-actualized in the good old psychoanalytical sense, nothing could be further from the truth except totally bogus models such as the action models. I think that I learned more about reasonable psychological health from reading one book on transactional analysis. Ian Stewart and Van Jones, Van with two N's, Van Joines, fascinating book, TA Today, A New Introduction to Transactional Analysis, that I did over a decade of highly successful Buddhist meditation. That doesn't mean that I have achieved perfect psychological health, not by a long shot. Focusing almost exclusively on psychological growth over insight practice is an epidemic disease in Western Buddhism. Many of the major retreat centers that purport to foster insight practice in the US and Europe are really bastions of the worst pop psychological bullshit retrofitted with a bastardized Buddhist front. You have only to go to a few small group meetings on retreats, as I mentioned in part 2, to hear that the majority of people who are supposed to be doing insight practices are actually just wallowing in their own neurotic crap. Sure, they may be highly intelligent, super sophisticated, fantastically well rationalized pseudo-Buddhist practitioners of the great sacred neurotic crap wallow, but they are wallowing just the same. While the Dharma is vast and the teachings of the wisdom traditions contain a lot of material for helping us grow psychologically, we can't conflate psychological growth and maturity with awakening. And letting people get stuck in the great dismal crap quagmire does them little service. If you ask me, which you clearly did as you are reading this book, as I said before, working on our psychological stuff can have lots of value, and Western psychology has added a vast array of useful conceptual frameworks and techniques to the world of psychological health and human development. But I firmly believe that clearly drawing the line between insight practice and psychological work is essential to doing either well. I have been to therapy and really got a lot out of it, just on a totally different front from what insight practices got me. It is not that I haven't had psychological insights of great value when on retreat, as I have had plenty. But those psychological insights come from good insight practice as some surprising and appreciated side effect rather than the other way around. I just would like to remind the viewer that Dr. Ingram here is a physician, and so his enlightenment, so-called, is not eliminating his Western scientific bias in any way. And, so he's in favor of therapy, he's in favor of all kinds of allopathic interventions, along with his, other Western scientific and political foibles. But he still says that he's enlightened, and those things are not mutually exclusive. So just not to go too much further into this, but this is somewhat of circular reasoning. He's kind of saying that these models are crap because I still have these problems and I am enlightened. Or it could be that these models are actually true and you are not enlightened. So, or it could be, both or neither. Further, it is oh so easy to imagine that the teachers on the front cushions couldn't possibly be as neurotic as we are. And before you know it, we have the breeding ground for massive shadow sides, exploitation, isolation, and scandal, just like we had with the models that serve up emotional perfection. The jet set culture of teachers popping in and out of town, getting up on the front cushion, spouting their beautiful ideals, and jetting off to somewhere else before anyone can see them as the humans they really are, only goes to reinforce these dangerous notions. It is just so easy to project all kinds of wondrous qualities onto them when the dream is so nicely laid out, the opportunities for reality testing so few, and the amount of transference and countertransference out there is simply huge. As an aside of great importance, anyone working with meditation teachers or teaching meditation should read up on projection, transference, and countertransference, as these fly thick and fast in the world of meditation just as they do in psychology. Want to perform a not-so-fun experiment that teaches you hard lessons about what ordinary adults can do and say when they get caught up in projection and transference? Write a book called something like Mastering the Core Teachings of the Buddha. Call yourself something such as an arahant and watch the projection and transference fly despite your best attempts to bring things back to earth in that very book. Ah, good times. Yeah, well, I can agree. He's put a target on his back, and I'm sure that he's been attacked unnecessarily, incessantly. Other highly recommended topics of useful theory that Western psychology provides that are largely lacking in Buddhism: narcissism, narcissistic injury, narcissistic rage, and narcissistic supply. All of these are worth reading up on and recognizing when they occur. While knowledge of them is not enough to eliminate their negative effects, it is better to understand the mechanisms than not. It is true that skillful use of transference can occasionally occur, but that is as slippery a slope as they get. Clearly, the amount of transference, projection, and idealization suits most teachers just fine, or they would go more out of their way to counter notions, to counter those notions and set the record straight. But as those teachers quickly learn, countering those notions just doesn't sell well most of the time. And getting caught up in that sort of transference feels mighty friggin' nice. Thus, I think that models that reinforce the notion that psychological perfection or freedom from our psychological stuff will come simply by seeing through the sense of a separate, permanent agent are a serious problem for these major reasons. And he cites 4. 1, they simply aren't true. 2, they cause practitioners to get caught up in their stuff rather than focusing on the 3 characteristics or something functionally equivalent, thus squandering the majority of practitioners' limited retreat in practice time. 3, they allow teachers to be able to ride the hot air of preposterous ideals to dangerous heights, as meditation scandal sheets reveal again and again. 4, they contribute to the erroneous sense of the gap between this ordinary human existence and awakening by creating unrealistic ideals and goals. Most Buddhist practitioners whom I know have something like 1 or more of the following belief structures, and there are 3. 1, awakening is impossible, so the best thing to try for is psychological or emotional health or perfection. 2, awakening is equivalent to psychological or emotional perfection, so by trying for psychological or emotional perfection, we are doing the practices that lead to awakening. 3, awakening involves psychological or emotional perfection, so it clearly is impossible, and by sitting, we are trying to accomplish something else. But if you ask them what that goal is, they are usually unable to answer clearly. What is so ironic is that awakening is hard, but clearly not impossible, and not nearly as impossible as achieving psychological or emotional perfection. In fact, seeing sensations clearly enough to see that they are all just happening, coming and going, is extremely straightforward once you finally realize that this is what you are supposed to be doing. Further, when I think back on all the things I have done, including going to medical school, working as a volunteer for a year in India, finishing an emergency medicine residency, I must say that what I went through to get those things was significantly more work than it took to get stream entry and even Aranship. It is not that getting stream entry was easy, just not as hard as plenty of other things I have done. I attribute my success to a vast array of factors, but two that are relevant here are a tolerance for pain and having a good working model that I was willing to modify as data from the experiment swamped prior hypotheses. That model was one that was blissfully free of the notion of emotional or psychological perfection. Psychological growth and maturation are reasonable things to aspire to and cultivate, but exaggeratedly high ideals involving notions of perfection are damaging and toxic to most practitioners, as reality testing has shown again and again. When I think about what it would take to achieve freedom from all psychological stuff, the response that comes is this: life is about stuff. Stuff is part of being alive. There is no way out of this while you are still living. There will be confusion, pain, miscommunication, misinterpretation, maladaptive patterns of behavior, unhelpful emotional reactions, weird personality traits, neuroses, and possibly much worse. There will be power plays, twisted psychological games, people with major personality disorders, which may include ourselves and our Dharma friends and teachers, and craziness. The injuries continue right along with the healing, and eventually the injuries win, and we die. This is a fundamental teaching of the Buddha. We could arguably classify all of these as learning and growth opportunities, or we could lump them into the great slag heap called suffering. You must determine for yourself which paradigm works best for you as you go along. I wish the whole Western Buddhist world would just get over this notion that these practices are all about getting to our happy place where nothing can ever go wrong, hurt us, or make us neurotic, and move on to mastering real Buddhist practice rather than chasing some ideal that will never appear. All that said, there is some debate about what factors of progress allow some people to just notice the three characteristics of the sensations that make up their world in the face of their stuff, as opposed to those who just flounder in their stuff. This question applies to many skillful meditation practices. Some would argue that you must have done enough psychological work and have dealt with enough of your issues or grown up in a sufficiently healthy psychological context to get to the place where you can move on to the next stage. I must reluctantly admit that there is probably some truth to this for many people. However, I did not consider myself particularly psychologically advanced, mature, or evolved when I started insight practices, nor did anyone who knew me well. I had all kinds of stuff to deal with and still do. Despite this, though, through good instruction, complete faith in the straightforwardness of the technique, and perhaps some other factors I have yet to identify, I was able to practice well, despite everything, and make the shift from being lost in content to noticing how things are. A subset of psychological models is the specific issues model, which says that we must completely work out each of our issues along the way, and that progress is essentially a countdown to having no issues at all, whatever that means. It is true that attaining a sufficiently wise and functional perspective on some issues can facilitate having a better life and also mastering insight practices. It is also true that insight practices can sometimes shed valuable light onto and improve our perspective on specific issues as we go along. However, I do not accept the notion that we simply eliminate some personal numbered master list of our issues one by one, and when we are done, that's it. That model places the focus so totally in the realm of content that it is hard to imagine anyone really understanding the direct clarity that comes from insight practices if they are working with that sort of a model. I have yet to meet anyone who could possibly be said to be anything resembling issue-free, no matter how much successful practice they have done. I find no Buddhist texts that even promise anything like the idea of being issue-free, as these sorts of concepts and ideals didn't seem to exist then. This issue model has seemingly arisen out of the last century or so of the development of modern psychological theory in the West. Okay, that is the end of that section. Let's get one more paragraph in here of the next section, which is called the no-thought models. Speaking of problematic models, we have the no-thought models. These are models that tend to focus on something different happening with thoughts in those who are awakened, rather than simply seeing through the thought patterns that create a sense of a center point or special, permanent, separate, independently existing self. These idealized models include not thinking certain thoughts, such as enlightened beings being unable to have thoughts I or I am, or them not thinking at all and thus stopping the process of thought, or some other modification to thoughts, such as always thinking good thoughts, whatever those are. Okay, we'll get back into going over this no-thought model tomorrow when we resume. I'll just say that, I like the idea here that he's really putting out that, getting enlightened through meditation is definitely possible. And it's not really that hard. You really just need a good map and you need to put in the time. But doing so will not solve all your problems in life. It'll just allow you to see reality more realistically. All right. Thanks for tuning in today. Have a great